So with these widget and app lifecycles out of the way, let's turn towards something which we've seen a lot, but which I haven't really had a closer look at. In your build methods, you always get this build context argument. Now, what's this build context all about in the end? We also use it, for example, in conjunction with media query or with theming with this of context method. What's the idea behind context? In Flutter, every widget has its own context. So every widget has its own context attached to it, and that's the context you get in the build method. That's why also if you have certain builder methods, like for show modal bottom sheet, the function you pass there, like this one here, actually receives a context. So this function, we're not using it here, but this function also receives a context automatically passed in by Flutter, because builder functions like this also return a new widget in the end, and that widget has its own context. So context is everywhere, and every widget has its own context attached. Now, the context in the end is the element of a widget in the element tree, you could say. It's some meta information about the widget and its location in the widget tree. So context is used internally by Flutter to understand where this widget belongs, and all the contexts of all the widgets, as I said, are basically the elements in the element trees, and therefore these contexts, you could say, know about each other. They know how widgets are related, how they belong together. The contexts build a skeleton of your widget tree. That's how you could think about that. So that context gives you a direct communication channel across your entire widget tree, because all contexts in the end know about each other. They know where in the widget tree they are and which other widgets exist around them, so to say. And that's why, for example, for accessing the theme or for navigation or for media queries, you use the context. Because Flutter has a very efficient communication channel behind the scenes for passing data between widgets. We, right now, always pass data between widgets by using their constructor, right? For example, here, when I create a chart, I pass a list of my recent transactions as an argument to the chart constructor, and therefore in the chart widget, we have to define the constructor, accept this argument, store this argument in a property, and then use this property here inside of the chart widget. That is how we pass data between widgets. Now, it's important to know this is the default way of passing data. But if you have a large widget tree, so with a widget that has another widget as a child, which has yet another widget as a child, and so on, then passing data between these widgets can get cumbersome. Here's an example, and we'll learn about a feature called inherited widget that helps us with make that simpler. So here's our setup. We have a relatively large widget tree with our app widget, a products widget, single product and product detail widget, and also a card widget, which is a sibling to the products widget, for example, in a row or in a column. Now, if we need some information that's managed in the state of my app in our product detail widget, then we in the end have to pass that data down through all the widgets all the way down to the product detail widget. And that's what we're currently doing in the app. Now, depending on the size of the app and the layers of widgets you have, this may or may not be a problem. For general data like what's our core theme, which is set up right at the start of our app, or what are the device dimensions, what's the device orientation, which also is managed by Flutter basically when we create the app, so therefore on the level of our root widget in the app. If we have such data that is possibly used by any widget in the tree and therefore would have to be passed down through many layers of widgets, then using arguments and manually passing down theme data and media query data would be really cumbersome. Hence, Flutter gives us a special widget, the inherited widget. We never used that, but media query and theme uses that behind the scenes. And you get a direct tunnel to the inherited widget and to data managed in there with the help of context, because the contexts know about the general structure of your widget tree, and therefore they can directly access any other widget without passing data through arguments. That's what's happening here in the main Dart file, for example, when we use media query of context. In the end, we tell Flutter we want to get access to our media query data, that media query data happens to be used at the top of our app in the end when we create the material app, you could say. The same for the theme, for example. And instead of manually passing down our theme data object here with the constructor of my homepage app and so on, and then to any other child widget as well, and the same for media query data, which is totally managed behind the scenes, instead of passing that through constructors, the context object has all the information Flutter needs to find out where our widget is positioned in the widget tree and how it gets to the topmost widget. And then it uses this inherited widget feature, which we won't dive too deep into right now, to get that general theme or media query data. So context holds information about the position of the widget in the overall widget tree, and it is really useful to Flutter because it allows Flutter to establish a direct communication channel behind the scenes to exchange data between maybe at the top of our widget tree or in a certain widget in general in our widget tree, and a totally different widget in our widget tree, which might be a couple of layers of widgets down. We'll actually also take advantage of this idea of passing data behind the scenes in the state management section of this course, where I will show you a convenient alternative to passing data via constructors of widgets. For the moment, we'll stick to that we pass data through constructor approach, but later, as I said, I will show you an alternative which is really good for bigger apps with multiple pages, which we don't really have yet. Hence, for now, our approach is fine, but it's important to understand what the general role of context is.